All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Solstice Webinar. I'm Allison Carr. If you guys could log into the chat box just below this window and let me know that you can see me and hear me. It'll give you a number of things to log into. The chat box, we're talking about the chat box down below. So one of them is Facebook. You can log in using other social media that you use, and it doesn't spam your social media or anything. It's just a quick way to log in. So if you guys could log in there and let me know that you can see me and hear me, and also tell me where you're calling or where you're viewing from. That would be great. And we're just going to give a few minutes here at the beginning for everybody to get logged in. So yeah, again, I'm asking everybody to log into the chat box down below and tell me where you're viewing from, and then we'll get started. So there's a little bit of a delay on this podcast because I'm using, what is it called, a webinar, because I'm using Wi-Fi. So you guys are going to hear things a little bit after I say them. So if there's moments where you ask questions and stuff and I don't hear it right away or answer it right away, that's why. So if you guys could log in to the chat box down below and let me know that you're here and that you can hear me, that would be great. So I'm just going to type something in the chat box too to let you guys know. If you're having trouble with anything, you can just refresh your screen. So. And if you haven't already, this would be a great time to go grab a warm beverage, some tea or some cocoa or something, like just get really cozy, because that's what this whole webinar is about. So if you could, if you've got a little bit of time, go ahead and do that. And I'm just waiting to see that everybody can hear me and is good with the chat box. So go ahead and let me know as soon as you can log into the chat box and tell me where you are viewing from. So you can use your Facebook account, you can use your Twitter account, you can use any account you have to log into the chat box. It just does it really quickly. So go ahead and let me know where you're, where you guys are viewing from, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So hi, I see everybody joining the call. Hi, you guys. This is the Solstice Webinar. I'm just waiting for everybody to get logged into the chat box. So go ahead, it's just below the screen. Go ahead and log in. You can email me if you're having trouble with that, and we'll troubleshoot that. And if I don't hear from folks in just a few minutes, we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to assume you guys can see and hear me. So yeah, go ahead and just log into the chat box down below and let me know that you are here and tell me where you're viewing from. So, and if you are just joining us now and you want to go grab a warm beverage or some hot cocoa or something to just sip on, we're going to get really cozy in this webinar. And yeah, this would be a good time to go do that while we're waiting for everybody else to jump on. So yeah, welcome you guys. You're in the right place. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. And if you can, log into the chat box down below. If you're having trouble with that, go ahead and email me. You all should have gotten an email that said we're starting now. So go ahead and just hit reply to that and let me know if you're having trouble with that function. And I will help you guys get logged in to the chat box, because that's how you're going to be able to ask questions on this webinar. So I'm just going to check one thing real quick. Make sure that we are good. And yeah, I'm just waiting for folks to log into the chat box. And oh, there you guys are. Hi. Okay, now I see you. For whatever reason, I tried to pull up my chat box on my iPad here, but that's not working. So, oh, good. I'm glad you guys can see and hear me. We don't have to mess with that anymore. So we're going to get started. Because I thought this was going to work, but it's not. I'm going to ask you guys to save your questions for after. You can type them in while we are doing the lecture, but know that I can't see them. So if I don't address them right away, that's why. I'm going to check the chat box at the end, and that's when I'll start answering questions. So if you have a question while we're going through, go ahead and ask, and then I'll get to them at the end. And that's why if I don't see them, it's because I can't see my chat box from my control screen here that I'm using for you guys. So I have to click into another screen. So we'll go ahead and get started just so that we can get this going, and we'll do questions at the end. So you guys, welcome. This is the Solstice Webinar. We are talking about how to stay sane and actually enjoy the holiday season. So I am going to share, I made a PowerPoint for you guys. I got fancy. So I'm going to share that with you. Let me pull that up just in a second. And we'll get this right up here. And then we're going to start the slideshow. There we go. So this is Finding Light in the Dark, Solstice Traditions and Yule Traditions. So I want to start by just telling you guys a little bit about my story. This is me in my 20s, little punk me. I was a Christian in my teens, early teens, and I ended up joining a fairly conservative fundamentalist church. And through my own political awakening, actually became very disillusioned with that church. And I went a little bit I went to the opposite end of the extreme and rejected Christianity outright. I no longer am that extreme. I feel like there's a lot of wonderful things. I just happened to fall into the wrong church. So really, my story with Christmas started as one of real disillusion. I, of course, loved Christmas as a kid, because most kids do. And I really felt connected to the whole idea of this time of year. And when I had that sort of spiritual sort of falling out with the particular church that I had chosen as a teenager, I really started feeling the sort of sadness and despair around this time of year. I saw that there was something really sacred and special to this time of year, but I didn't see it reflected around me. And as my political awareness started to grow, I really started to get angry at the ways that Christmas was represented in modern culture. So the consumerism, I was a budding environmentalist, and I hated the way that Christmas traditions wasted energy and electricity and were wasteful. I hated all the commercialism of it. And I really went to a place where I just rejected it outright. And honestly, that made my life kind of miserable, and it made Christmas kind of miserable for me, because if at least in this country and in the Western world, it is a very hegemonic holiday. Like, it is all encompassing. If you're not within the fold, it's a very difficult time of year if you do not have, if you're not wanting to participate in this holiday, because it's everywhere. It's in your face. It's all the time. And everybody loves it, right? So to be a hater, you're out. You're just doubly out, because not only do you not like this thing that everybody likes, but you also just don't like it. So really what changed for me was discovering my own spirituality, discovering my own way of walking in the world. And for me, that was really reconnecting with the earth and reconnecting with earth-based traditions. And I discovered a mentor here in Portland, the Portland area where I'm actually broadcasting from right now. And I her name is Colette Gardner, and I just want to honor her right now because most of what I'm teaching you is stuff I learned from her. And if it were not for her, I think I would not have found the path that I'm now walking. And really what that did is it reignited my sense of enchantment with the world. And I feel like this time of year especially is a lot about enchantment and connecting with enchantment. And I wanted to just emphasize that. We're going to return to that in a little bit. But what I learned from Colette was this idea of the holidays that make up the wheel of the year. And some of you on this call have already been traveling through the wheel of the year with me. But they're a series of 8 based pagan or earth-based holidays that have to do with the movement of the sun around the earth. They have to do with the seasonal rhythms of the earth. And when I tapped into that, it felt so right for me because the earth was one thing, nature was one thing that I really connected with, and that I felt like sort of superseded any other ideology, religion, or philosophy. It was just simple. It was a way for me to be simply in touch with my own humanity and with nature and the things that surrounded me on a daily basis. So we are in what is considered sort of the bottom of the wheel of the year right now. We're at the darkest part of the year. Solstice can be considered the very end of the wheel. It also could be considered the very beginning. I mean, endings are always beginnings. And really what this holiday is it is like the idea of, so the sun is being reborn. As the days get shorter and shorter, right now we're in that period right up until solstice, which happens this weekend. You can start celebrating now. The 20th and the 21st are the traditional days to start celebrating it. But the days are getting shorter and shorter. The nights are getting longer and longer. And then there's this tipping point where the earth or the sun is reborn. And all of the traditions we're going to talk about today have to do with bringing about that birth, that rebirth of the sun, and hence the rebirth of the new year. So contrary to how we celebrate it now, this is really a time of quiet reflection. This is a time for dreaming in the dark. This is a time for connecting to that inner light within you. So if the days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and the nights are getting longer, there must be a reason. There must be something nourishing and good about this. You know, the whole earth goes through a renewal at this time. So rather than trying to ignore it or cover it up or pretend it's not happening, the wisdom that this season teaches us is to drop into that darkness. And that can be scary and uncomfortable and hard for people. So I'm going to give you some suggestions in this webinar for how to ease that transition and really connect with the darkness and see it as something that is rich and nourishing and restful rather than something that is scary or brings up hard stuff. It does tend to bring up hard stuff, but I think the more you can breathe and relax into it, actually the more you start to see the gifts in some of that hard stuff. So I like to think of it this way. If we co-create our realities, so there's this, you guys are all probably familiar with the idea that you create your own reality. If we co-create our realities, then we really need this time to dream, right? Dreaming happens at night. Dreaming happens in the dark. We need this time to dream a new world. This is necessary for our evolution. So we're talking about Yule, which is also known as the solstice. Yule is the old Anglo-Germanic word for it. And really, a lot of the traditions that we are used to celebrating associated with Christmas actually go back to this older holiday of Yule, or the pagan solstice. And so I'm going to talk about some of them. So I've got some examples here in this picture. So the very first one is this idea of sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic is where you actually, it's creating an act of magic by using a representation of something. So guess what? Christmas lights are actually a form of ancient sympathetic magic. And what they're designed to do is bring about the rebirth of the sun. So we light candles, we put little lights out, and notice that it's like, I mean, I know people now go way overboard and just blast with the Christmas lights, but the traditional lights associated with Christmas are candles, tiny sparks of light in a dark field. You know, even the Christmas lights that people put up on their house, they're in little tiny individual lights. It's not like shining a huge spotlight. It's holding that silent flame and that individual light within the darkness. I like to think of this time of year as sort of being like the first few days after a child is born, or the first few weeks after a child is born. And that really sets the energy. And those of you that have kids or have been around newborn babies, you know, it's a very tender, quiet time. There's a lot of sleeping going on. You know, if you're a new mom, there's maybe a little bit of insanity going on, but really it's a time for being internal. You don't leave the house very much. It's a very quiet time. So the other thing you'll see in this picture is evergreen. Evergreen is a huge symbol associated with this holiday. And the reason for that is that evergreen holds the hope of life returning, right? Evergreen trees, when everything else appears to die in the natural world, evergreen trees hold that vibrant green spirit, letting us know that spring is coming again. Not all is dead. So we bring evergreen boughs inside on the solstice. Traditionally, they were seen as not only being incredibly life-renewing, but also protective. It's the darkest time of the year. This was also seen as the one time of the year where it was okay to go out into nature and invite the green spirit of nature into your home. And you would do that by bringing in the evergreen boughs, bringing in the evergreen. So to take that a little bit further, we have the Christmas tree tradition. And I want to just pose this idea. Now, I know that not everybody who is into environmentalism loves the Christmas tree. So I want to just pose an alternate way of thinking about it and give you guys some options. You definitely don't have to have a Christmas tree if that's not something you feel perfectly aligned with. But the Christmas tree is really a representation of the world tree in Norse and Germanic mythologies. The world tree was seen as encompassing the entire universe. So the world that we live in was sort of seen as the middle world, kind of the trunk of the tree. The underworld was considered the roots of the tree, and the branches were considered the, the heavens, the starry realms, the land of the gods. And this idea of bringing the world tree inside your house and then decorating it with representations of all the things that you love about life, right? That's the ornaments. It's what's turned into the idea of ornaments. Decorating it with candles to bring back the light of the sun, decorating it with little, representations of what you love about life. So that's one way you can start to rethink this idea of the Christmas tree as a living altar in your house. And then what do? You put presents underneath it. You put offerings. And I'm going to talk about a little bit later about a way to reimagine this whole gift giving idea. So I want to just say a word about Christmas trees. If you really feel strongly that Christmas trees are not good for the environment, I urge you to honor that. I'd like to just pose a couple of things of putting it into perspective. So on the whole, Christmas trees are a lower impact agricultural crop. They use a lot less pesticides than some of the foods we eat if we're eating conventional foods. Of course, modern Christmas tree farming is not perfect, and I'm not claiming that it is. But in terms of adding waste to the world, I would much rather see a natural Christmas tree in people's houses than I would a fake one, which does never decompose. So Christmas trees get mulched and put in people's gardens, and they go back to the earth and they decompose. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but if you love your Christmas tree and you're feeling guilty about it, I want to just give you a way of reimagining it. And it's not the worst thing you can do. I love Christmas trees. I have one in my house. There's nothing that makes your house smell more alive than having a Christmas tree there. And I love this idea of thinking of it as a living altar in my house. And then the other things associated with this season were feasting, and especially feasting on the rare things, which aren't so rare in our world anymore. So feasting on, cuts of meat and also sugary treats. And really, if you think about it, the idea of holding a feast in the middle of the darkest and leanest time of the year really is an act of faith that the world will return, that the seasons will return, that things will turn green again. And it was also a way of redistributing wealth in ancient cultures. So usually the chief or the lord or the king in whatever land you were in would host the feast. And this was also a time of year where the herds of livestock were culled, and those that were thought to be too sick to make it through the winter were called for the feast. So it very much was tied into the agricultural practices of ancient people. So I want to share one more thing about the solstice days, which I love, which is this idea of the omen days. Now, the omen days were it's what we later turned into the 12 days of Christmas. So we've all heard that song. They were a time that was the Yule time festival, and they originally started on the solstice. In the Renaissance, it shifted. Once Christianity took hold in the European world, it shifted to January 25th. December 25th. What month are we in? December 25th through January 5th, which is known as the 12th night. This is a festival. So this was not seen as just one day. Now we celebrate Christmas as one day, right? We all get the day off work. It's one day. This was actually a festival. It was a period of 12 days. And these 12 days were used not just for celebrating, but also for making up time within the year. Like we now celebrate a leap day in February. The omen days were actually used as the time to make up the extra time in the calendar. So the Earth does not make a perfect 365-day rotation around the sun. And every few years you need to add a day to make that perfect. So that day was added in here in the omen days. It was used to make up time so that the calendar stayed true and correct. The reason why it's called the omen days is there was an ancient practice of going outside each day, and this may have just been reserved for shamanic practitioners within the culture, or the sages, the magicians, the wizards, of going outside each day and collecting an omen. And that omen would apply to the months of the year. So the first day you'd get an omen for January, the second day for February, and so on and so forth, until you had the omen for all 12 days of the coming year. So it really is a time of reflecting and dreaming the new world. And the thing with omens is you may have an idea of what they are, but you don't know fully what's going to happen. And that's really the attitude and, that's the attitude and sort of mindset that I like to bring to the solstice time. We all love to rush ahead and, really get our New Year's plans pinned down and get our calendar out. And I just encourage you guys at this time of year to start slowing down and just be in the darkness. Be in this place of uncertainty and collect the omens. Start to see what might be coming on the horizon for you guys, but don't try to pin it down yet. Wait until the sun really starts showing its face a little further into February. Wait until things in the year really start to pick up. And that way you, one, don't disappoint yourself because you're failing at the plans you made during a time where it's actually pretty hard to see the future. But you also you can tap into the quiet nature and the spirit of this holiday. So I like to imagine this, and this is not something that I can back up with historical fact, but if the 12 days of Yule started on the solstice, if you count it from December 20th through the new year, that's pretty much 12 days. So I like to think about this whole idea of where we got the idea to start the calendar on January 1st instead of the actual solstice, which is really when the year turns over, is that there was this little 12-day period when the sun was a brand new baby. And it was seen as a time where it was time outside of time. It was time outside of regular time. Regular life hadn't started back up yet. And it was really taking a moment to celebrate that brand new baby of the sun. And you'll notice that the imagery associated with this is very close to the imagery of the Christ child. And historians have gone back and done a little work on the actual biblical story of the the gospel and the birth of Jesus. And what they figured out is that probably he was born sometime in August, just by what the Bible says about the stars in the sky and what was showing up at that time. But I don't think it's, I mean, I think that it was a very, like, this was the natural place for the birth of Christ to be fit into the older pagan holiday traditions of Europe. So as Christianity spread across Europe, many of the old pagan holidays were adopted into Christian holidays and Catholic holidays. And I think the association of this time of year with the newborn baby and the newborn son and this birth of a child really was an older throwback to something deeper. And it was a natural place for the story of Christ to fit into this time of year. And what a beautiful way of weaving those two traditions together. You know, and celebrating this idea of a newborn king is not new. It's not new or novel to Christianity. So you guys, there's a link here. Caitlin Matthews writes a blog about the Omen Days where she talks about it a little more. So if you want to read up on that, you can Google her, Caitlin Matthews, blogspot.com, and just Google Caitlin Matthews blogspot or Omen Days. And she writes a beautiful article on how this was celebrated and how you can tap in and start, you know, going outside to look for your own omen for the year. I also forgot to say at the beginning, I have some notes for you guys that I didn't get finished before this call. So I'm going to email them out to everybody, and it will have this link in it and a couple other links for you guys to read more about this. So here's some other mythological associations with the time of Yule. So there's this idea of the wild hunt. So the 12 days of Yule were not only seen as the Omen Days, but they were also seen as the time of the wild hunt. Now this was, it took, the names of the characters in the idea of the wild hunt took various incarnations. One of them was this very localized god in the British Isles called Herne, H-E-R-N-E. And he was said to drive a sleigh filled with, driven by 8 wild stags across the night sky, hunting. And it was seen as a time, this was seen as a time where it was actually kind of a risky time to be outside at night. And it was also a time for really sort of boning and beefing up on your magical protection, so that we talked about bringing the evergreen boughs inside your house. Another magical protection was mistletoe, was seen as very sacred and protective. And so this is where we get these traditions of bringing evergreen and mistletoe into the home as protection. And it was also seen as a time where you weren't supposed to go outside at night for risk that you might be snapped up by Herne the hunter and you know, taken into the underworld, never to be seen again. So again, this is where, you know, this idea of cozy inside celebrations, you know, if we're all trapped inside together, why not celebrate? Why not bust out the wine and the fire and get cozy? The other lovely mythological tradition was this struggle between the Holly King and the Oak King. And I always get this a little switch, so I'm going to look at my notes. So on the winter solstice, the Holly King is defeated by the Oak King, and it signals, so the Holly King represents the dark half of the year, and the Oak King represents the light half of the year. So this signals the switch of power. So as the sun is returning, the Oak King rises in power. And so the Holly King is this figure who is depicted as a bearded white, you know, a white bearded man, decked out in a wreath of holly around his head, you know, festooned with bells, and in a lot of places he was seen as an elven or fairy character, as was the Oak King. But the Oak King was more the green man figure that some of you might be familiar with. You know, his head was wreathed in oak leaves and really carried that wild oak and acorn imagery. So you can start to see where some of these images of Santa Claus came from. This wild hunt with the stags racing across the sky, the horned animals. the Holly King with his, you know, decked in the red and green and the bells of Solstice. This is all places where we might have gotten the myth of Santa Claus. Some of you might be familiar with articles that circulate around right now about Santa Claus having to do with the Sami people, or the Laplanders up in the north in Scandinavia, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. The last character that I wanted to mention is Saint Lucia, who is a Catholic saint. She's a woman often depicted in a white gown with a red sash, and she wears a wreath on her head that has 4 candles on each corner of the wreath. So she is actually a holdover from there's 2 schools of thought. There is a Scandinavian sort of trickster goddess character called Lucy, Lussie, who was seen to be part of the Wild Hunt, or one of the sort of goblins or creatures that could capture you during the 12, you know, dark nights of Christmas. Or also she might be connected to a Roman goddess also named Lucia. So I just wanted to bring that up because St. Lucia's Day, I think, is celebrated on December 13th and is a really important holiday still within certain Christian traditions, Catholicism, and especially Lutheranism, which I think points back to that Scandinavian and Germanic connection with the old character of Lucy. So I wanted to just bring in this image of the stag, or the horned one, is a very important character during this time of year. So Herne the hunter was also considered the horned god. Here's another beautiful old picture of a stag. And then I just wanted to show you this, which is a reindeer and a man from the Sami ethnic group in the north of Scandinavia. So I want you to just notice his clothing and his dress. So he has this hat on top of his head that does sort of flop over to one side. You might imagine it being bright red with a white ball on the end of it. There are lots of ideas about the flying reindeer being a reference to psychedelic mushrooms, especially the Amanita muscara mushroom, which is interestingly enough, bright red with white spots on it. Also the idea that the Sami people had constructed, they lived in sort of yurt style tents. They were a nomadic people. And during times of heavy snowfall, the easiest way in and out of their homes was through the hole in the ceiling that also let smoke out. So this idea of a Sami shaman, you know, dropping down through the chimney, it's not far-fetched. I do want to point out that a lot of the modern day Santa Claus symbolism that we get was constructed by Coca-Cola in advertisements that they created in the 1920s. And a lot of people feel like this was the first time that the really strong iconographic red and white suit was actually constructed by Coca-Cola as a marketing thing, because guess what the colors of Coca-Cola are? So I want to bring that in also. I do believe that there is lots of truth to these ancient ideas, and I also believe that they're far more complicated and mixed up than looking back. Hindsight is always a sort of false 20/20. So I just want to bring up that idea of complexity, and it's definitely, you can see the roots and the origins of these traditions going back to these times, but it may not be as cut and dry as we think. So let's talk about creating your own rituals. This is really a time in our modern world where we have to pick out what's most important to us about this holiday. Maybe knowing some of these ancient traditions and ancient roots of the solstice and Yule will give you guys some ideas of how you want to start incorporating it and celebrating it. I'm going to give you some ideas, and then I really encourage you to allow the flight of your imagination to really take hold here and create some traditions that feel good and right to you. Because for me, this holiday is all about enchantment. And enchantment is really dreaming up the world as we want it to be and tapping into that childlike wonder that we had as a kid and seeing the world as a living, enchanted place. So some of these rituals I'm going to give you are about re-tapping into that enchantment. So evergreen, of course. I encourage you guys to actually go out into the outside. You know, even if like here in Portland, I used to just take a walk around. There's a fair number of cedar trees and Doug fir trees that grow within the city limits. And I would take a walk around my neighborhood and I would just collect down branches. You do not have to be in the most beautiful, you know, snow carpeted forest in the world to actually to practice this. If you're not in a place where evergreens grow, if you're not in a climate that is conducive to that evergreen forest, go out and see what is around. What are the green things in your world? And see if you can bring a few of them inside. And as you do, invite the spirits, the green spirits of your world inside with you. I love this quote by Jeanette Winterson, who says, food, fire, walks, dreams, cold, sleep, love, slowness, time, quiet, books, seasons, all these things which are not really things but moments of life take on a different quality at nighttime, where the moon reflects the light of the sun and we have time to reflect what life is to us, knowing that it passes and that every bit of it in its change and its difference is here and now, is the here and now of what we have. So I invite you guys to take in the spirit of darkness and really reframe for yourself the way you think about darkness and the way you think about the night. I know we all get bummed out when the clocks change in November, and partly I think that's because changing clocks is just really messing with natural human rhythms. But I encourage you guys to really dip into the night and the darkness and see if you can use it as a time for pausing, for reflecting, unloading your calendar, actually. Really reevaluate what your commitments are. See if you can actually take a time, like take an evening and spend some time without your electric lights on, without your computer on, without your gadgets and your screens. Light some candles. If you've got a fireplace, light a fire. And just spend some time gazing into that winter light, which is the firelight, the candle light, the orange light, the glow of winter. And see what that brings up for you. See how that changes or shifts your perspective on what's going on. Even if you can only do it for a few hours an evening. There's this quote that Jeanette Winterson, I took from an article that I'm going to put in your notes, where she writes about this very thing, about how in our modern culture we fear the dark and we don't give it its due, and it's really here for a purpose. It's a beautiful article, and I'm going to give you guys a link for it. I encourage you to read it. But she suggests spending an evening without electricity, seeing what that's like for you. Modify it however you want, you know, make sure you get some hot dinner. And if you have an electric stove, that's just going to be the way it has to be. But really use it and tap into the spirit of darkness and coziness. One of the things I have done around this time of the year, not since I've had a child, but definitely before when I was single, I actually took a vow of silence and I spent 24 hours living in silent retreat. And pairing it up with this idea of spending time in the dark. So I told everybody that I was living with at the time that I was going to do a day of silent meditation. And I spent the time in my room, journaling, napping, lighting candles, being with myself, really being in quiet reflection. And the amazing thing about that day is that it was during a time in my life where I was very conflicted. I was considering going back to grad school. I didn't see how things were all going to work. I didn't know how I was going to afford things. I had a lot of big things on my plate, and I was really sort of drowning in this idea of indecision. And after that day, the plan for the next 5 years of my life just easily fell into my hands. And all of a sudden, after that day of deciding to just be quiet and still and internal, I knew exactly where I was headed and where I wanted to go. And I'm not saying that'll happen for everybody, but it definitely brought an air of clarity into my life. So I encourage you guys to tune in and tap in to whatever speaks to you, and really this idea of tuning into your inner wisdom and your inner light during the holiday season. I want to bring up one last tradition which I love, which is this idea of wassailing or wassailing. And there's that old song we all might have heard about, "Now we go a wassailing." What wassail is a alcoholic drink that's usually made in a giant silver bowl. It sort of morphed into what we now think of as caroling. Like, people would go from house to house with this giant spiced mulled drink that actually had, one of the ingredients in it is toast, like toasted bread. So it has like bits of bread floating in it. I've never actually drunk it. But if you're up for the challenge, you could look into that. But just this idea of wassailing came from older traditions of going out and singing to the trees and giving offerings and libations to the trees. So going out in the orchard and actually pouring cider into the ground to give an offering to the fruit trees so that they'll bear another year of delicious fruit for us to harvest. So since I'm such a tree lover and I love connecting with nature spirits and being outside, this was a natural fit for me. It may feel too out there for some of you guys, but if you have a garden, you might want to think about just leaving little presents for the plants in your garden, little offerings of water or whatever calls to you, of just really like leaving it as just a little like gift of gratitude, like come back next year, like come, flourish and grow. So this is just the last idea I wanted to leave you with. So this idea of wassailing actually came from a much older tradition of singing to and toasting the trees that sustain us through the year. And then the last idea I want to visit before we have time for questions is this idea of giving gifts. So really what I would love you guys to rethink about the whole gifting thing is, who is it that holds the light for you? Who sustains you in dark times? And give your gifts based on that appreciation. Instead of this obligation of, oh God, I got to get my Aunt Jenny a gift because it's Christmas and that's what we do. I know that a lot of times our families are the biggest impediment and obligation during this time of year. So I'm not saying that this can happen easily or perfectly, but if you guys can take some time to reevaluate how you want to do solstice and just kind of, make it known, make an announcement. We're not going to do many gifts this year. So please don't buy us gifts, and we won't be offended, and know that, we're keeping gifting really simple this year. And really think about, who are the people that hold the light for you? Who sustains you in dark times? And that's really what the gifting idea came from. Showing those people around us, the community we have that sustains us in the darkness, showing them our appreciation and love. So I'm going to go back to our view of me, and I'm going to check in to the chat box. So if you guys have questions, oh no, you guys couldn't see any pictures of me? Is anybody there? Can you guys type into the chat box? Let me know. Did anybody see those slides? I can send out the PowerPoint in the email. Oh no, I'm so sorry, you guys. Okay. So you can see me, but you didn't see the, oh, bummer. I don't know why that happened. I really apologize. Oh, okay. I'm going to send you guys the PowerPoint slides so you can see them. They're just a little bit of pictures. Um, yeah, and you got everything from the talk. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing from everybody, no slides. I will send those, I will email those out to you guys. I really apologize for that. This is my very first webinar using this platform. So one of the reasons I wanted to do it was just to learn the platform. So now I know, yeah. Rachel's saying it made a great visualization in the darkness to imagine what you were saying and showing. Perfect. So I'm actually forcing you guys into this idea. So this was also just a challenge for me to see if I could do this. So now I know there's some problems and I got to figure it out. But thanks for being patient through that. I would love to hear from you guys. Oh, the symbolism. Okay, so Tanya's saying, can you talk about the symbolism of the white stag and why it's important? Yeah, that's an amazing question, Tanya, and I'm so glad you asked that because the stag is one of the mythical, or not mythical, it's one of the animal spirits that I work with the most strongly. So stags are seen as incredibly protective beings. They are also edge walkers, right? So the stag is a creature that walks between the wild and the cultivated world. He walks between the world of man and the wild places. Yeah, you're obsessed with stag too. Me too. Part of that stag community. So the stag is really, and if we take that metaphor and apply it to the spiritual world, the stag is also, he walks between the worlds. So between this world and the underworld, between this world and the overworld. The stag is really seen as this creature that is both wild and tame. You know, so we often see deer grazing at the edges. Like they will kind of come up and, you know, if you live in the country, they might eat your roses or your garden. It's like they're comfortable walking in both worlds. So that is, I think, one of the important connections. The other thing to think about with the stag is they've got these amazing antlers, right? Which were seen, I think, in ancient times as being antenna connecting them to the spirit realm, connecting them to the heavens. And they're not, it's interesting because they're a prey animal, but they are seen as symbols of power and might. And also this idea of sort of the good, everything that is good about the masculine energy. So the warrior, the protective, the wildness, the, you know, just like all the positive attributes of the divine masculine energy can be seen in the stag also. Does that help answer your question? Or is there more you want me to go into about the stag? And any other questions for you guys about, you know, things I didn't touch on or troubling parts about the season that you would like to see addressed or that you maybe struggle with? Okay, good, Tanya. So while we're waiting, like I said, there's a slight delay here. So if anybody's typing in, know that I'll get it in just a few minutes. While we're waiting, I want to tell you guys, you'll notice just below the chat box, there is a link that says join my free webinar on the Wheel of the Year. So I just wanted to mention for you guys, there is I'm offering a free webinar in January, mid-January, that talks about the 7 other holidays that we didn't touch on. This idea of walking through the year intentionally. I run an immersion program, and there's a couple students here on the webinar with us. This was have been traveling with me through this whole year in the immersion program. So I'm about to launch it again. It's starting in January 31st is our first class. But if you want to learn more about it, I give a pretty detailed and lovely free webinar in mid-January. You can click on that link down there and just sign up. I also am offering like an early bird discount for anybody who knows that they want to join me for the Wheel of the Year this year. So if you sign up for that webinar now, you will get in on the free the discount for the year-long class. But even if you're not sure, you don't even know if you don't even know who I am, you just joined this webinar and you want to learn more about it, it's a totally free webinar. It happens in mid-January, and we talk about the 8 other holidays of the year. And Tanya, I see your question, and I'm gonna get back to it in just a second. And it really is a perfect time. Mid-January, I found, is a much better time than January 1st for actually setting intentions for the whole rest of the year. So it's a great time to get a template for the rest of the year and think about how you want to walk through the year. I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions. I like this idea instead of just allowing some intentions to bubble up. It's like we're still really in the deep belly of the year in January 1st. So allow some intentions to bubble up, but don't make any commitments until we get further into February. I find that when I've done it this way, I stick to my commitments, and my year goes so much better. So Tanya says, how do you handle family and friends who are Christian and do not support or understand your selected traditions? This is hard. This is hard. And so I'll have to say, Tanya, coming from a family that is not really Christian, this is a harder one for me to answer, because I understand that I'm lucky. I have a very tolerant and not very dogmatic family. I would say, do the best you can. The wonderful thing about these traditions is that they just look like Christmas traditions, right? So nobody has to know that you went outside to collect your evergreen boughs and invited the nature spirits inside. That can be a personal, private thing that you do. The idea of cutting down on the gifts can be a thing where that's just can be about simplifying. It doesn't have to be about any of this stuff. So I would say really keep the parts that are sacred to you protected, and honor them and protect them, because nobody else has to know about them, and certainly not people who are hostile to it. And the rest of it can just look like Christmas, really. That's what I love about this time of the year, is that everybody has their own way of looking at it. I'm wondering if there's a little bit more to that question, though, Tanya, and I wonder if you would say more about the specific places where you butt heads with your family or the tension is created. And then Rachel says, in healing work with the sessions of darkness within ourselves, any idea for edge walking in self and using this as a time for alchemy around transforming our inner darkness into light? Very interesting. So I think that there's 2 parts to this question that I want to talk about. And one is this idea of inner darkness. So in everything that I do, I come from a place of accepting loving kindness. I come from a place of holding and loving everything about myself. So I like to think of darkness and sort of turn it a little bit on its head to the hidden. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about it, it's like we have this whole cultural idea that dark is bad and light is good. And I know you know that, Rachel. So I'm not accusing you of this, but I think that if you can tap into this idea of discovering the hidden parts of yourself, oftentimes simply being aware of them starts the transformation. If you go in with this idea that you've got darkness that you need to drive out or lighten up, it's a much different attitude. It's a much less accepting and loving way of sitting with yourself. So my very first idea or suggestion around this would be to allow the hidden parts of yourself a little room to become known to you. And then awareness often brings with it a whole baggage of, a cascade of self-talk. And as much as you can, if you can just be observant of the self-talk that comes with it. A lot of times what we think about as darkness is really just something that's hidden that we may feel some emotions around, like shame or guilt, and simply bringing it into the fold of your being, bringing it into the fold of yourself and admitting that it's there. Often if you can try not to go into the shame spiral around it, or allow yourself to go in the shame spiral, but then just be aware of the fact that this is just a shame spiral and I'm not a bad person. That often can bring a little bit of lightness. And I want to just invite, I know Jen is on this call, who does a lot of work with Brene Brown's system of wholehearted living. So Jen, if you have anything to chime in here about this, because I know this is sort of some of your expertise, please feel free to chime in also. Okay, Tanya is saying dogmatic father, too much to type, but I'll keep things sacred and keep things sacred and protective. It's totally okay, you guys, to be closeted about some of these traditions and to be private about them. You know, this is your own personal spirituality. And I believe personally, I know that I'm broadcasting this live on the internet and I have a whole website that says like, I'm a witch, but I personally believe, you guys, it's absolutely within your rights to be protected and sacred about this and not share it with the people who are going to just crap all over it. Jen is saying, I just love talking about it being hidden as opposed to dark. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that is, if that's a good reframe. Rachel, do you need any more from me around that? I love that you're talking about as a time for alchemy, because I love that word and I love the idea of transforming things within us. And I think maybe even just the idea of rephrasing or reframing things could be an alchemical act. Okay, Rachel's saying, totally understand, no shame at all. Rather recognizing the aspects of ourselves that are identical to the wheel of the earth. Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes, Rachel, I have so much to say about that. And I want to invite you to join us in January, because that's when I'm going to talk about that more. I don't think I have enough time to go into it here, but yes, there are tons and tons of practices. So right now, for solstice, I would just encourage you to this idea of meditating on the internal light within and allowing it to shine a little awareness into the hidden places within you, because those not only are they're dark and scary, but they're also your richest places for fertile ground, right? So some like the soil, like everything that's happening in the natural world right now is happening underground. So this time of year, the soil is going bananas, you guys. All the microbes are down there having a party. And we don't see anything happening with the plants on the top of the earth, you know, like on the earth's surface, up in the air where we can see. But everything's happening in the soil and underneath. So if you guys can think about this idea of like what's fermenting in the garden of your life, you know, what are the microbes and the underground beings doing? You might even want to do some meditations on rich, fertile. Yes, good. Yeah, do some meditations on where your roots are at right now. Go down and look at what's happening with the roots of your life. So yeah. Good. I'm glad this is sparking a good discussion with you guys around the idea of hidden. And yeah, I feel like the hidden is also what's in the soil. So yeah, you guys check in. What's happening in the soil of your life? What's happening underground? I find even just doing a meditation where you imagine that you're dropping down below the earth's surface and looking at your life as if you're looking up can be incredibly powerful, looking at what the roots of your life are. So yeah, Rachel, does that feel like a good practice that might answer your question? So we are going to wrap up here. Our hour is up. Thank you guys for sticking with me. And I'm so sorry about the tech snafu. It's always just a learning journey, and I have no idea what happened, but I'll figure it out for the next one. And stay tuned in your email for the notes that I'm going to send out, which have all the links to more articles and all the things I talked about. I'll send you guys the PDF slides, the PowerPoint slides, so that you guys can look at them. I collected some gorgeous photographs that I was really excited to share with you guys. So thank you all, and I'm going to sign out unless anybody has any more questions. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Tanya. Thanks, Rachel and Jen, for chiming in. Loved having you guys join me. And yeah, please come and join me in mid-January and learn about the rest of the Wheel of the Year and how you guys can use that as a template for transforming your lives and, you know, just living more in connection. So yeah. Let me find my way out of here. Okay. Bye, everybody.